From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. A panel discussion out of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State on a couple of timely topics of interest to you cow-calf producers, taking preventative measures against anaplasmosis disease from taking root in the cow herd this fall, and evaluating the body condition of cows coming off of summer grass in planning for their fall and winter nutrition. Featured are K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Katie Reif, and Bob Weaber. Their conversation begins in a moment. Later on, following today's agricultural news headlines, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. All this right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome to our Wednesday edition of Agriculture Today. And today we'll address 2 topics for the benefit of you cow-calf producers as summer gives way to fall. This via the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. Coming up right here, input on preventing anaplasmosis from becoming a herd health problem, and comments later on managing cow body condition into the fall. Aboard for this discussion, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber and veterinarians Bob Larson, Brad White, and special guest Katie Reif. Here's Brad.
We hear a lot about anaplasmosis. Dr. Reif is one of our experts here at K-State, has done a lot of research on anaplasmosis, how it's transmitted. This is one of the things that when I was in practice, I practiced in southeast Missouri, we would deal with anaplasmosis every fall. Can you tell us a little bit about what causes anaplasmosis?
Sure. So the agent of anaplasmosis is a bacteria called Anaplasma marginale. And this is a special bacteria in that it lives in the red blood cells of cattle. And so all of the clinical signs associated with this disease have to do with the destruction of these infected red blood cells. So that's where you're going to start seeing the anemia, the lethargy, sometimes some neurologic side effects too. So it may be a really erratic cow as well.
Okay. So basically she's short of red blood cells, short of oxygen.
Yes, so she can either be tired or crazy.
Yeah, and Bob, what does that look like clinically?
All right, so when I was in practice, we also saw it, and sometimes the first call you'd get from the client was that you had a down cow or a dead cow. But if she was down, basically unable to rise, and sometimes very aggressive, so if you try to approach them, really trying to take you out, all of those things have to do with being really low on oxygen. So the brain is starved of oxygen, the muscles are starved of oxygen. If you looked at, around the eye or around the vulva, a lot of times that, where you could see skin, it was very pale. So those are some of the main things. And so if you're in the time of year, a region of the country, and a cow that has some of those symptoms, anaplasmosis is very likely.
Now, you mentioned time of year. Dr. Reif, what time of year would you expect to see these?
Sure. So the clinical cases we would most commonly see starting from about midsummer to late fall if transmission is associated with certain arthropod vectors such as ticks, definitely. So ticks are biological vectors, which means that they can actually amplify, or the pathogen can replicate within them. So the tick gets some of the anaplasma from an infected cow. It replicates it about 1 million times, and then it's able to transmit it the next time it feeds on a
Wow,
naive
so it doesn't have to get very much infection, and then all of a sudden it grows in the tick, and then when it goes to the next animal, it's going to pass it along.
Yes. So one of the really important things to remember about anaplasmosis is that once a cow is infected, that cow is typically infected for up to potentially the rest of her life. And that infection will remain. We won't see clinical symptoms, but the bacteria is there circulating at really low levels. So ticks can still feed on these carrier cows, we'll call them, and they're able to get those low levels, amplify them, and then pass them on.
So once it's in my herd, even if I don't see clinical cases, I still probably have anaplasmosis. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's really difficult to actually completely clear an infected cow. We can knock it back pretty well, but once that animal's immune system has really kicked in, it's able to really efficiently control the pathogen. Sometimes where we may see a resurgence is if that cow becomes, or that animal becomes immunosuppressed.
And sometimes that happens. Like a cow, often their immune system is actually suppressed right around the time she gives birth.
Yep.
And that's every year that happens. And it's not as severe as, some of the things we think of human diseases that cause immunosuppression or cancer therapies, those kinds of things. But just giving birth suppresses the immune system a fair amount.
So you talked about the ticks as one method of transmission, and essentially they're moving blood from one cow to another cow. Are there other ways this disease can be transmitted, or is that the only way?
Sure. So just one point of correction. The ticks aren't actually moving blood. They're just moving the bacteria. So there's other bugs that move the actual blood. So that would be things like your biting flies. So they're actually picking up infected blood, and now their mouth parts are contaminated. And then when they go and they feed on another animal, and that has to be almost instantaneously, within a couple minutes, if they have a lot of bacteria on their mouth parts, they can contaminate the new wound on the animal that they're currently feeding on and transmit the anaplasma to that animal. But that is only efficient when that animal is in the acute stage or is very sick with the bacteria. So flies are very inefficient transmitters. But
what about us? Is there anything that we do that may transmit from animal to animal when we're working the calves or processing them or doing anything, or the cows?
Sure. So just like flies transmitting infected blood, we can very efficiently transmit infected blood as well, either by reusing needles, dehorners, castration equipment, etc. Anything where you're potentially moving...
Tattoo equipment.
Yes, tattoo equipment. Anything where you're potentially moving blood from one animal to another animal, there's a risk of transmission. So either by changing needles or disinfecting some of these surgical equipments, that's a good way to reduce.
So the flies, mechanical, the ticks, they're going to populate, the bacteria is going to grow in them, and then all the equipment that we use, also a mechanical type transfer. If there's blood on it, I could move it from animal to animal.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about control of anaplasmosis, and I want to talk about it from two approaches. So one, I want to start with the individual sick cow, because Bob, you mentioned they could be pretty depressed, they could be off by themselves, they can be in bad shape. Is there anything special we want to do in handling that cow?
Well, first thing is to be careful that you handle them quietly, in that I'm trying to not cause more agitation, cause them to expend more energy. And so I'm trying to keep them very quiet. So we may not be able to nor want to get them up and drive them to a squeeze chute or something like that. A lot of times we're going to want to treat them right where they are. So, get a rope and halter on them, tie them down, and treat them right where they are. Don't try to drive them to...
Because they have, the reason they started...
is bad.
The reason they started showing clinical signs is they're out of reserve.
They're really low on oxygen, so don't make them work. No exercise at all. Yeah. So that's one thing, and that's not convenient, but it's what you have to do. And we can treat these cows with antibiotics that will then start killing the bacteria, but as you can imagine, that's not going to happen immediately, and our blood cells aren't going to immediately replenish. And so it's about get the treatment started right now, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Occasionally, depending on the animal and the situation, we can do blood transfusions as well, which help to kind of temporarily get that oxygen level back up into the... That's not something we typically do, but it's in the toolbox. It's something you can do in a certain situation.
Because even if we kill the bacteria now, her clinical signs are due to the lack of red blood cells, and those red blood cells are going to take a while to replenish.
That's exactly right.
So we need to be very careful with how we handle those. And we mentioned, both of you guys mentioned the neurologic signs, or sometimes they'll be, and I think one of you said agitated. They can be seemingly angry because they don't have enough oxygen going to their brain. So you have to be careful from a people standpoint of want to take care of the cow, but also want to be sure that as the people are around that cow, that you're safe, because she won't act normal.
Right.
She won't act like she normally does.
If you say, well, my cows are pretty tame, well, the
Yes.
cow brain that doesn't have oxygen is not a good thing.
So Katie, I want to ask you, now, so we talked about the individual cow. You mentioned a couple things that make me think control of this on a herd level is going to be challenging, because we've got lots of forms of transmission, that blood transmission, the ticks. We could do it with needles as we transfer between animals, and then long-term carrier state. So what do I do on a herd level?
So I think the first really important thing to do is, number one, to know whether or not you have anaplasma in your herd, because that would inform a lot of management choices. If you do have a herd that has anaplasma in it, you can, just a few animals, you can either choose to call those animals from the herd and then really watch and screen any new incoming animals. If you are in an endemic area, you can treat with medicated chlorotetracycline medicated mineral, and that really just helps to suppress the bacterial load in these animals, especially in the vector season or during times where those animals are going to be worked through the chutes, so where mechanical transmission by needles may come more into play.
And for the chlorotetracycline in the mineral, you would need VFD.
And we've talked about those before, and working with your veterinarian to really figure out how best to deliver that.
You mentioned endemic regions, so
Yes.
most of us would sort of have this conception that maybe most of Kansas might be endemic, but that's not really the case, right?
Well, actually now pretty much the whole state of Kansas is endemic. There was a really nice survey study that was led by Dr. Greg Hanslachek at the Kansas Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, and my group joined in on that study as well. What we found was that about 50% of the beef cattle herds in Kansas that were sampled were actively infected with this disease, and that extended into western Kansas
Which
as
is
well.
not historically been not as bad a contamination or infection rate in the drier parts of the state, but it's
Yes.
kind of moved west over time.
After this break, we'll have more from our BCI panel on anaplasmosis control, and again later on managing cow body condition coming off summer grass. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now, picking back up on the conversation on contending with the threat of anaplasmosis disease in beef cow herds. Again at the table for this BCI Cattle Chat, K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and a special guest, Katie Reif. And before moving on to the other topic the group takes up today, they summarize their take-home points on anaplasmosis management and control. Brad raises a question about what's meant when describing anaplasmosis as an endemic disease in a given region.
When you guys are saying endemic, so for my herd, does that mean if I eliminate it from my herd, it's probably still in the area and it could turn back up in my herd again? If I'm in an endemic area, that means a lot of herds are infected.
I think that's exactly what it means, in that it's a whole lot easier to keep it out of a herd if you're in an area where it's relatively rare.
Yeah.
And so that the load in the cattle population, the load in the tick population is lower. If you're in an area where most herds are infected, or maybe even all herds are infected, trying to get rid of the disease from your herd and get rid of carrier cows from your herd is probably not going to be, I'll even say it won't be successful.
It's going to be challenging with that around in the area, which leads us to our Cattle Chat checklist for this week, which is our top tips for managing anaplasmosis.
All right, number 6 is observe the herd carefully this time of year. As we go late summer, early fall, that's when we're most likely to see cases. And if you can pick up those cases just a little bit earlier, they're kind of separating themselves from the herd, treatment is a lot more effective the earlier in the disease process we can treat them.
All right, number 5 is have a plan for introducing new animals into your herd, whether that means that you're bringing in animals from a non-endemic area into an endemic area or transferring animals from an endemic area into a non-endemic area.
Number 4, handle clinical cases carefully. They're in a hypoxic condition, and so they can go down pretty quickly with very much exercise or movement. The other thing to be aware of is they're not in their right mind. They're a little can be pretty aggressive, so clinical cases handle carefully from a human standpoint as well.
All right, number 3, let's clean the equipment between animals so that we don't transfer blood. So that's tattoo pliers, castration knives, and very importantly, injection needles, so one needle per cow.
Number 2, talk to your veterinarian about your control plan, and you may want to get a veterinary feed directive or VFD in place.
And number 1, figure out if you have anaplasmosis in your herd or not. That's the first step in developing a good management strategy.
Absolutely, and that was our BCI Cattle Chat checklist on our top 6 tips for managing anaplasmosis. One of the other topics, and we talked about anaplasmosis, which is an important fall topic. Another fall topic that comes up is we're thinking about getting the calves ready to wean. We're going to probably preg check the cows. But I want to talk a little bit about body condition and body condition scoring. So we often use a score of 1 being very thin to 9 being very fat. A lot of our cows are in the 4 to 6 range, with 5 being in the middle. So let's take an example. Spring calving herd. You go out, they've still got the calves on them now. They have not yet been weaned. But you go out and look, and we've had a pretty good year for grass. But there's a lot of variability within the herd. So I have some cows that are pretty darn thin, and they've got a calf on them. And some cows, also with a calf on them, but really have a little bit more condition. Is there anything I should do to manage that? Is there anything there I should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think it is the time of year where we recommend people as they process and wean calves that they pay attention to body condition scores in cows, and particularly as you preg check and figure out, am I having open cows that may be related to body condition score, so they may have conceived but got low enough in condition that they slipped those calves, or heat-related stress, those things. So trying to use body condition score as a gas gauge, if you will, of energy reserves in those cows is really important and critical kind of going into winter, because as cows dry off, this is the time of year that it's inexpensive to put body condition score back on cows. And so it's a great time to sort of monitor that and then make a managerial decision based on either sorting to better pasture may be enough if they're not in too bad a shape. If they're low body condition score for cows, they're probably going to require some additional supplementation here to get back to where they need to be.
I'm a little torn, because do I judge her negatively for being thin? Because she might have weaned a pretty good calf, but maybe she doesn't fit the environment. Maybe her milking potential doesn't fit my environment, so do I...
I think that's a great discussion, and I get involved in some of these discussions. So that cow that weans a calf, it's a big calf, so heavy weaning weight, but she's kind of thin. Do I consider her one of my best cows or one of my worst cows? And I could kind of argue either way.
Right.
And it really has to do to me, did she get pregnant again?
I'd say, did she breed back?
She gets a little bit of a pass if she's bred.
And will she put that body condition back on without much additional cost, so she can just put it right back on with forage and get pregnant again next year? Then she's one of my good cows. But if I have to treat her differently than the rest of the cows, and I need to supplement her additionally through the winter, well, then I don't like her quite as much, and I want her to fit the environment a little bit better. So I could take either side of this, because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of an answer.
Take the other side of the equation. She's a little bit fleshy. She weans a decent calf, not the best calf in the herd, but she's carrying some extra flesh, and as my dad called them, well, she's an easy keeper, right? So she's staying there. Is she one of my better cows, or do I say, you know what, she's using that nutrition to put on fat instead of milk?
Well,
where does she fall?
In general, I like that cow, But that's because I'm assuming that she's going to carry that weight through the winter with very little supplementation and go into the next spring in good body condition and be able to really have good momentum going into the next year. And as long as she's able to do that on inexpensive or little supplementation, I do kind of like her. But it's a balancing between I want her to lactate and provide enough milk for that calf to grow, but not so much that then she becomes an expensive cow to keep. So it's a balance.
You kind of like and kind of dislike all of them. It's they're walking a fine line with you. Sounds like.
Well, they are walking a fine line. That's exactly right.
But I think the other piece that comes into play is a little bit of, well, what kind of year was it?
Yes.
This year in eastern Kansas, if a cow comes in thin, I'm going to look at her a little sideways.
Well,
because we've had a lot of forage.
We have had a lot of forage, and in that situation, I'm going to look at that cow and make sure, are her teeth good?
Is there something else
healthy?
going on?
Is there something else going on? Because she doesn't really have very many excuses this year in our part of the state.
Yeah,
but I think, and I'll go back briefly to the variability issue. I have some concerns there. When we have a lot of you're always going to have some, but you have a lot of variability in body score. I may have a lot of variability in either mature size or lactation potential within that herd, which makes it hard for me to manage because I've got to manage them as a group.
The other bit that may come into play is as you start body conditioning, scoring those cows, pay attention to what their calving distribution was and figure out, do the cows that calved early, are they in adequate shape? Have they past peak lactation, so they've maybe milked down some, but have started to recover some body condition score in the grazing season, or are they late calvers that hit peak lactation after peak forage quality, and they're in the slump, right? Yeah. And so it'll help you kind of fine-tune maybe a little bit of your calving distribution or calving time to better align with forage production. So there's a lot of management information in body condition score.
And I want to shift topics just a little bit, and after we get the body score, we'll often use it to make a nutritional plan. So I want to talk about when we get to mid-gestation, one of the things that I have talked about with people is that's the easiest time for a cow. She doesn't have a big nutritional requirement.
Right. So she's not lactating. She doesn't have a large fetus that she's taking care of during the pregnancy. So yeah, her calorie needs are the lowest they'll ever be right about now for a spring calving cow.
So I wean the calf and she's there. So can I just let her stay at that low body score?
I was going to say, one of the things you said was one of the real keys to body condition score recovery, and that's controlling nutrient demand. So if you've got some thinner cows, particularly if you have a bunch of cows, maybe do 2 weaning dates, right? So wean those calves off of cows that are thin early, because we know really from this time moving into October on native prairie, cows will lose about a quarter of a body condition score every 2 weeks that you delay weaning. So if you're already in a hole, the rule is quit digging, right?
Right.
So wean those calves. That provides you an opportunity to really use the calories that are available in the system more effectively to gain body condition.
So say that again. Every 2 weeks I delay weaning, they're going to lose a quarter body condition.
Yes. If they're still lactating, the forage is well past peak.
Yeah, and we're kind of lucky this year. Our warm season grass is still in pretty good shape, but it's going to start to turn relatively quickly into a much lower quality product. So.
And there's no magic time to wean. You don't have to wait for a long time to wean based on your herd. You may look and decide that the weaning date may need to change a little bit.
Yep, for sure.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and a featured guest joining the group this time, K-State veterinarian Katie Reif. As always, you can hear the full podcast and find out about subscribing to it at beefcattleinstitute.org. That's beefcattleinstitute.org. You are tuned to Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside now for these next few moments. When we come back, today's agricultural news headlines, plus much more, here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. On now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. The New York Times and others reported yesterday that the U.S. and Japan may fall short of signing that new trade deal this week as negotiators from both countries grapple with how to resolve the U.S. threat to place tariffs on cars from Japan. However, reports late yesterday afternoon indicated that the two sides had completed their negotiations. The two countries have been working toward finishing a limited deal this week as both President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan prepared to appear side by side at that UN General Assembly meeting in New York. The key holdup has been the U.S. threat to tax cars imported from Japan. The Times article says that President Trump has long seen that threat to tax cars, which make up more than one-third of U.S. imports from Japan, as a source of leverage that has brought Japan to the trade negotiating table. That's also become an obstacle to the deal's resolution. According to the Times, Japan is seeking a firm commitment from the administration not to tax its cars and is pushing to include a sunset clause that would cause the deal and any benefits it has delivered to American agricultural producers to expire if the U.S. follows through on its car tax threats. Now, this impasse raises questions about whether the U.S. and Japan will be able to finish the deal in the near future in time for the Japanese legislature to consider it when it convenes next month. The prospective deal is expected to reduce barriers to American exports of beef, pork, and wheat. In return, the U.S. would drop its barriers to Japanese machinery and chemicals, and both sides would sign on to new standards for e-commerce and other digital trade. Meantime, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin initially said earlier this week that the U.S.-China trade talks with Vice Premier Liu He would take place next week in Washington, but later revised his statement to say that it would be the week of October the 7th. Mnuchin said in an interview with Fox Business Network that deputy-level negotiations last week had made some progress in easing trade tensions. Some closely following the talks said they expect the gathering will take place on October the 10th and 11th. Word that the talks are scheduled has eased some concerns on the U.S.-China trade front, but have not totally removed concerns given the history of how quickly this issue can shift. The waiting continues for the biofuels industry after meetings on the renewable fuels standard continued last week at the White House, but no new details have emerged. The Deputy Secretary for the USDA, Steve Censky, said at an agribusiness conference in Kansas City this week that the Trump administration at the moment was not ready to release any new details on what might come from changes in volume obligations for ethanol and biodiesel to offset the lost demand due to EPA's approval of small refinery exemptions. Censky did indicate the administration is looking to ensure that policy changes would meet the blend levels spelled out in the RFS law. Censky was speaking at the Ag Outlook Forum hosted by the Agricultural Business Council of Kansas City and AgriPulse. Censky said the next steps for any plan coming from the White House would be taken by the White House Economic Council and Director Larry Kudlow. He said he doesn't have a time frame for any kind of announcement. Now, patience on the biofuels announcement from the administration is running thin with Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Grassley has talked about an apparent agreement reached during a meeting at the White House some 2 weeks ago in which the small refinery exemptions would still be granted by the EPA, but the agency would then account for those in setting biofuel levels under the RFS. EPA data shows that as of September the 19th, there have been 42 exemptions requested, 31 granted, 6 were denied, 3 withdrawn or declared ineligible, and 2 are listed as still pending. The Kansas Department of Agriculture is one of 15 state agencies participating in a functional exercise this week focused on states' plans for African swine fever response and mitigation. This functional exercise, as they call it, led by the USDA, will test participants' abilities to respond to a simulated animal disease event. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
This week, there are major exercises going on across the country, exercises to gauge and test how animal health officials would react and how fast they would react to a reported case of African swine fever. But the USDA's chief veterinarian, Dr. Jack Scheer, told us even one case anywhere in the country could be devastating to the pork industry, not just from having to euthanize animals.
28% of swine production in the United States is exported. Should this disease hit us, a single case would shut that export down until we could eradicate the disease.
Now, for some diseases with some countries, we have agreements that would only ban our products that come from the region of the outbreak. But for African swine fever, Dr. Scheer says,
we don't have those regionalization agreements in place with other countries. We are working or have talked with Canada on a regionalization process should they get it or we get it. And we're also going to try to put that in place for Mexico.
But at the moment, one case of ASF and all U.S. pork exports to all countries would shut down. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
For its part, the Kansas Department of Agriculture does conduct an annual statewide exercise to practice the state's response plan to a foreign animal disease event. Typically, it's been with a simulation of foot and mouth disease, but this month's multi-state exercise is focused on African swine fever. Members of the KDA Division of Animal Health have been actively working with federal partners, state agencies of neighboring states, and representatives from the pork industry to enhance the state's response plan with specific focus on ASF. This exercise is simulating a real-world response as much as possible, including actual veterinarian testing and laboratory results, along with planning and resource coordination, disease mitigation, public educational information, and permitted movement to allow continuity of business for non-infected operations within the framework of that exercise continuing this week. Want to remind you once again, if you'd like to take advantage of our podcast service, should you happen to miss one of our broadcasts on this affiliate any given day, it's very easy to do so. Go to this web address, agtoday.net, agtoday.net. You can listen to the daily podcast right there at that site. If you'd like, you can also subscribe to the podcast, and you can receive automatic downloads to your device every day. So again, check that out at agtoday.net. And we will return shortly on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
All that open space intrigued me, and I wanted to do something with it.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I just pulled 1, 2, 3, 8 books from my bookcase. They all discuss and suggest how to develop an attractive garden. They're not talking about landscape design as such, but more on how to create habitat, how to make a garden space interesting, and how you can do your share about environmental issues. The other day when I was walking the hill with the blooming fall flowers, I saw only one monarch butterfly visiting the goldenrods. We used to have passing through lots of them. I don't see them anymore. I wonder if they are on the farm. I must go and look. My oldest son and family recently moved from the East Coast back to Kansas. It's good to have them closer. My children know they're free and can go to the end of the world if that is their desire and need. They all know they're loved, and we know they love us. But back to the project at hand. My son, bought property in town, which basically, besides the house, has a big fenced-in lawn. There are a few trees just outside the wooden privacy fence along the street right-of-way. When we visited, I walked the property, but actually one could see it all from the deck. It's registered as an open space, which takes an hour and 15 minutes to mow. All that open space intrigued me, and I wanted to do something with it, and I know I can. However, it is and will be their choice, and they have plenty of other things to do right now. Someday they might move to the country and invest in property with land to walk on, care for, and grow crops. If nothing else, grow good hay. But as my son wisely said, if I had done that now, I would have to buy basic farm equipment to take care of the land, and that is not a priority now. So for now, the in-town property they bought is a wise decision. But here is an opportunity. The very empty backyard and the very simplistic front landscape of their recently bought home can be improved upon. If ever they would want to move on to the country and sell this property, a real landscape with the outdoor experience will add to the value and marketability. Remember the old adage, location, 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 but then what does the place look like and what does it feel like? The 8 books are quickly pulled off the shelf. All have similar titles. In your own backyard, how to create and enjoy your own private retreat, and more. But that's enough. And then I have a Dutch book on same topic, but you can't read it. The title, Your Garden as a Nature Reserve, translated. There are many books, but this is enough to change their open lawn into a place with a strong sense of place. And mind you, who wants to mow for an hour and never see anything? Here I just stepped into the house, and while stepping through the gate, a small snake passed in front of me. It had the color of earth. It was the movement which caught my eye. I asked my son to send me a rough sketch of his yard, with the accurate measurements of length, width, and location of the few existing trees. And once I've that, I will draw a scale drawing of 1 inch or 8 feet or 10 feet. Then I will place tracing paper over it, and I will start to draw the ideas I have down on paper. I must keep scale in mind, and there is something else I must keep in mind. What do they want? As a designer, that's important. Yes, the client expects you, as a designer, to create for them what they want. But the what they want is not always what they need or what they can have. Here a designer has to listen and guide them. In the yard I'm talking about, I want to redo the size of the lawn. I want to plant trees and shrubs and flowers in such a way that there will be a path to walk with some privacy. It may be a short walk, but it will be a brief experience of being away. Hopefully there will be a garden spider which will make it home. I want a few birds to build nests. If nothing else, fly to and from the trees to a feeder. With wind protection, I want butterflies to fit about. It will be compact, but we can do it, knowing the things we know. Remember the definition of a garden. It's the arrangement of plant material, trees, shrubs, flowers, ground covers and grasses, in such a way and on such a scale that one can walk through it. It provides privacy, but most important, having a feeling of being somewhere. If you keep saying that while working, you'll get where you want to be with the project. The word habitat holds a lot of meaning, just like the word house, which does not need to be home, holds a lot of meaning. If habitat becomes home and means safety and protection and add to that food and water, we're getting somewhere. if that's all put together in a pleasing way so that we are rewarded, then it can be called good. Once I have the measurements and the accurate north on the paper, I can start to work. But as I have been thinking about this project, I already have lots of ideas. And you know, it doesn't have to cost a fortune if we start with small plants. If cared for, they will grow. Actually, that's part of the fun. Look what we did here on the hill. It took only 45 years. But it has been good for many years already.
Gus van der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And with that, our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.